Parents hear baby and dog crying in room. When they see why, they call 911. It was late afternoon at the Patterson home, nestled in a sleepy neighborhood just outside of Savannah, Georgia. The late summer sun filtered through the sheer curtains, casting soft golden light across the living room floor. Melissa sat curled up on the couch with a book in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in several minutes. James, her husband, sat nearby, flipping through a home improvement magazine he didn't seem especially interested in. The only real sound in the house was the faint whirring of the ceiling fan overhead. Their 9-month-old son, Noah, had been put down for his afternoon nap nearly 30 minutes earlier. The baby monitor on the side table beside Melissa was quiet, except for the occasional rustle as Noah shifted in his crib. Their golden retriever, Bailey, lay sprawled at Melissa's feet, breathing softly and twitching now and then in a dream. Everything felt calm. Still. Almost too still. Bailey suddenly jerked awake, her ears perked up. She didn't bark at first, just stood, nose in the air, body alert. Melissa looked down, confused. Bailey's tail wasn't wagging. She was frozen, staring toward the hallway. Then, she took off. The peaceful silence shattered as Bailey bolted across the hardwood floor, claws clicking frantically, barking in loud, sharp bursts. She skidded to a stop outside Noah's room, barking louder. The baby monitor crackled, and Noah's cry pierced through, shrill, broken, unfamiliar. Melissa's heart pounded. Something didn't sound right. James was already on his feet. Melissa followed, nearly tripping over the coffee table as she scrambled up. Bailey wasn't just barking now. She was howling, a deep, urgent sound that neither of them had heard before. She lunged toward the door but then pulled back, pacing anxiously. Melissa reached for the baby monitor, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. Noah was definitely crying, but the tone was different. Higher. Scared. It wasn't a hungry or tired cry. It was something else. Bailey suddenly turned to face them, planting herself in front of the nursery door. She growled low, not at them, but at something inside the room. Her body was stiff, ears pinned, tail down. Her eyes didn't leave the door. James reached for the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn all the way. He pushed. It budged slightly, then stopped, as if something heavy was pressed up against it. Melissa's breath caught in her throat. Bailey barked again, short and fierce, and then looked back at Melissa with wide, pleading eyes. A strange dread settled in Melissa's chest. She didn't understand what was happening. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Bailey barked again, more frantic this time. The kind of bark that said this wasn't a game, this wasn't nothing. And through it all, Noah kept crying. James threw his shoulder against the door again, harder this time. It moved just an inch, then stuck. Something inside was blocking it. Melissa stood behind him, clutching the baby monitor against her chest, heart racing. Noah's cries had turned desperate, coming in short gasps, like he couldn't catch his breath. The sound made her stomach twist. Bailey stayed pressed to the wall beside the door frame, her body trembling. Her barking had stopped, but she growled in a low, steady rhythm. Her head was turned toward the crack in the door, muscles tight. She was no longer trying to get inside. She was waiting. James pushed again, gritting his teeth, but the door wouldn't give. He paused to catch his breath, his face flushed, and looked at Melissa. Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to. Something was inside the nursery, and it wasn't supposed to be there. Melissa took a step back, her eyes never leaving the door. Her legs felt unsteady. Bailey glanced at her, then back at the crack between the door and the frame. She let out a sharp, warning bark, the kind she only used when someone rang the doorbell or a raccoon got too close to the porch at night. Then Noah's crying changed. It wasn't louder. It was softer, thinner. There was a pause between sobs that stretched too long. Melissa felt a cold rush of fear crawl up her spine. She didn't even realize she was moving until she found herself beside James, reaching for the doorknob with trembling fingers. James braced himself and shoved again, harder this time, shoulder first. The door creaked and groaned. Then something shifted on the other side. A soft thump, like fabric sliding across the floor. The door opened a few inches more. From that narrow gap, they could see the edge of the crib, bathed in the gentle glow of the nightlight. A stuffed giraffe had fallen to the floor, lying on its side. Noah was still crying, somewhere just out of view. James looked down. A soft object had wedged itself against the bottom of the door. A baby blanket. Not thick, but enough to jam the door if pushed the right way. He knelt and tugged it out. The door finally opened wide. Bailey rushed inside, her nails scrabbling against the hardwood. She planted herself between the door and the crib, facing it, body stiff again. Her ears stood high, nose lifted toward the blankets. Melissa stepped in behind her and froze. The room looked normal. The mobile above the crib turned slowly. The curtains swayed gently, as if brushed by a breeze. Nothing seemed out of place. But Bailey wouldn't move. She growled, deep and constant, her eyes fixed on something inside the crib. Noah's cries filled the room, shrill and frightened. But something else was there. Something neither of them could see yet. James stood frozen at the doorway, eyes scanning the room for something, anything, that explained Bailey's behavior. The curtains swayed slightly. The mobile above the crib spun lazily, its soft lullaby tune winding down. Noah's tiny fists punched the air, his face red from crying. But nothing looked out of the ordinary. Bailey didn't move. She stood guard, her body stiff, nose twitching. Her head followed every tiny movement from the crib. Melissa crept closer, arms out, ready to lift Noah out, but Bailey blocked her path with a sudden growl, not loud, but clear. A warning. Melissa stopped mid-step. Her eyes met Bailey's. The dog wasn't snarling. She wasn't aggressive. She was focused, protective. She hadn't taken her eyes off the crib once. Melissa's heart pounded louder in her ears. James reached for the small flashlight they kept in the hallway drawer. He flicked it on and moved closer, angling the beam across the crib. At first, all he saw were the folds of a soft blue blanket and Noah's flailing arms. But then, something shifted, barely noticeable. A shape. Curled. Still. The flashlight caught a flash of movement, subtle but unmistakable. A long, narrow form tucked beneath the blanket at the far corner of the crib, just inches from Noah's feet. James stepped back, fast. Melissa let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She couldn't quite see what it was, but James had. His face had gone pale, his jaw tightened. Bailey barked once, sharp and loud, then resumed her low growl, every muscle in her body taut. She stayed between the crib and the rest of the room, her eyes locked on the object under the blanket. Noah's cries grew louder again, frantic and confused. James didn't speak. He didn't need to. His movements were careful now, deliberate. He kept the flashlight trained on the crib, narrowing the beam. Melissa leaned in slightly, trying to see what had stopped him cold. That's when she saw it too. A small shimmer in the light, something smooth, shiny. A glint of deep, dull green, almost hidden in the shadows of the blanket. It didn't move much, just enough. Melissa's knees went weak. She gripped the edge of the crib for support. Her eyes flicked to Noah, still crying, still kicking his feet, still within reach of whatever it was. Bailey inched forward, her growl deepening, not lunging, not barking wildly, just holding her ground. Steady. Watching. The room felt thick with silence, broken only by Noah's cries and the steady hum of Bailey's growl. Melissa's heart thundered in her chest. Something was in that crib with their baby, and it was alive. Melissa's fingers fumbled with her phone as she backed away from the crib, eyes never leaving Noah. Her voice trembled as she spoke, trying to keep it steady. She gave the dispatcher their address, her words fast and clipped. Then she said what she saw, something moving in the crib, something Bailey wouldn't let her get close to. The dispatcher's tone shifted immediately. Calm but firm. Stay back. Keep the dog in the room if she's guarding the baby. Help is on the way. Do not try to remove the child yourself." Melissa nodded, even though no one could see her. James stood behind her, still holding the flashlight, its beam locked on the same corner of the crib. The shape hadn't moved much, but it was definitely there, coiled, breathing. Bailey didn't bark now. Her tail was still, ears forward, body low and alert. She was focused on the shape like her entire life depended on it. Every time Noah moved, Bailey shifted her weight slightly, keeping herself between the baby and whatever was under that blanket. Melissa's hands trembled as she lowered the phone. A siren in the distance grew louder. Noah's crying had softened again, not from comfort, but from exhaustion. His little legs kicked less now, his sobs more breath than sound. Melissa's chest ached at the sound, helplessness wrapping around her like ice. The front door opened fast. No knock. A uniformed man with animal control on his vest stepped inside, followed closely by 2 paramedics. James pointed to the nursery wordlessly. The officer entered first, slowly, carefully. He paused when he saw Bailey. Melissa opened her mouth to warn him, but before she could, Bailey stepped aside just an inch, not moving away, just giving room. She was still guarding. The officer moved to the crib, crouched slightly, flashlight in one hand, a long tool in the other. He peeled back the corner of the blanket with precision, like he already knew what was hiding there. His face stayed calm, but Melissa noticed the way his mouth tightened. The moment stretched. Then, in one sudden motion, the officer brought the tool down and pinned something. There was a flurry of movement, a quick, tight coil. Melissa gasped and turned away. James wrapped an arm around her shoulder, firm and grounding. The officer moved quickly, removing the blanket entirely. He lifted something long and curved, careful but sure. It dangled from the tool, limp, motionless. He dropped it into a secure container and closed the lid with a loud click. "It's out," he said. Bailey relaxed, just like that. Her body softened. Her head dropped slightly. She looked up at Melissa, tail giving a small, tired wag. The paramedics moved in and checked Noah. They lifted him gently, inspecting every inch. No bites, no scratches. Just a flushed face, soaked pajamas, and tear-streaked cheeks. He was okay. Bailey sat down, eyes still on the crib, quiet, watchful. The danger had passed, but the room still felt heavy with what could have been. Melissa sat on the nursery floor, legs folded under her, arms wrapped tightly around Noah. His soft hiccups were the only sound in the room now. Bailey rested beside them, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, her eyes half closed but still watchful. She hadn't moved far from the crib, not really, just enough to let Noah be held. The animal control officer knelt down near the crib, peering into the now empty corner where the blanket had been. He pointed to a faint drag mark on the sheet, just a few inches long. Then he stood up and turned toward James, voice low. "It was a copperhead," he said. "Probably came in through the crawl space, maybe the vent. With the weather cooling down, they come looking for warmth. You were lucky." James didn't respond right away. He just stared at the crib, his mouth slightly open. He looked pale. The officer added, "Most dogs would bark and back away. Yours didn't. She did something I've only seen once or twice. She held it there, kept it from moving. Probably saved your baby's life." Bailey's ears twitched slightly at the sound of his voice, but she didn't lift her head. Melissa leaned into Noah's tiny body, kissing his damp forehead over and over. Her voice cracked as she whispered his name. Later, after the officers and paramedics were gone, James sealed up the vent in the nursery. He triple-checked the screens. He walked the yard with a flashlight, even though it was still daylight. Melissa stayed indoors with Bailey and Noah. She gave Bailey a long bath in the sink, her hands gentle, her voice soft. Bailey didn't resist. She just stood there, tired but calm, letting herself be cared for. That evening, the 3 of them sat on the couch, Melissa, James, and Bailey, with Noah asleep in Melissa's arms. His breathing was peaceful now, even. Safe. Melissa looked down at Bailey, her voice still quiet. "You knew," she said. "You knew before we did." Bailey blinked slowly, then laid her head on Melissa's lap. Her tail gave a soft thump. Neighbors came by the next day after hearing the sirens. One of them, an older man who lived 2 houses down, mentioned he'd seen a snake near the shared fence last week. "Thought it was long gone," he said. "Guess not." The story spread quickly. People called Bailey a hero. The vet down the street offered her a year of free checkups. The local paper asked for a photo. But Bailey didn't care about any of that. She stayed close to Noah, every nap, every bedtime. Lying just outside the crib, eyes half shut but never all the way asleep. And Melissa? She never doubted Bailey again, not for a second.